Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Molly O'Brien. Thank you so much for joining me on this Wednesday, February 21st. I'm, again, Molly O'Brien, filling in for host Rick Simone as we take a break from the taste just this week. Don't worry, he'll be back next week. And of course, I'll be here once again tomorrow. So we have a show full of art, science, and literature for you today. I'm very pleased to introduce and welcome my first guest, New York Times best-selling author and award-winning writer, author Amy Bloom. Thank you so much for joining me today, Amy.
It's very nice to be here representing literature.
Yes, so we are going to take a deep dive into your very newest book, White Houses. I'm so excited to be chatting with you about this book today. It's your first dive into historical fiction, and it's a beautiful romance story. So we have a lot to talk about, including some of your other works, possibly what's coming up for you next. But let's first talk about this book, White Houses. Again, a beautiful romance story with a very well-known first lady and a very prominent journalist as well, but maybe not quite so well-known. Talk to us a little bit about this book.
Well, I think this book is certainly a love story, and it's a love story that was sort of hidden from history in that Eleanor Roosevelt had a passionate 4-year affair with Lorena Hickok, who was then the most prominent female journalist in the United States. And you never heard about it. And the reason you never heard about it is because literally the White House press secretary would tear Lorena's photo out of the family photographs because she was at every dinner, at every party, at every Easter egg hunt, and they would tear her picture out because they didn't want people to suspect that the relationship was what it was, although she was characterized by the White House as first friend. But that tended to ignore the fact that her bedroom adjoined Eleanor Roosevelt's bedroom, and there was a door between them, and they went back and forth for the 4 years in which the romance was really at its peak. I'm glad you said it's a beautiful romance. I think that that's true, but I think that my greater interest is in long relationships, not just when they are pretty and the flowers are falling and the rainbows are swirling, but the long run. The long relationship in which love endures even if it changes forms.
And so this was your first take on historical fiction. Talk to us a little bit about what it was like for you to take a story that is based partly on fact, but then to grow an actual story out of it.
Well, I mean, a novel is a novel. What surprised me was that once I did the research, once I read the 3,000 letters that have been written between Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok, once I read the biographies of Eleanor Roosevelt, once I read Lorena Hickok's own biography, you could begin to allow the characters to take on new shapes and to find new voices for them. I mean, obviously, I wasn't going to try to imitate Eleanor Roosevelt's very distinctive voice, of which we have lots of recordings. I wasn't trying to impersonate her, which is why the narrator is Lorena, who's a journalist, who's an outsider, who's a working class person in a White House full of people born into privilege. And I thought this is going to be a sharp, funny, frank, clear-eyed person looking from the outside to the inside.
And what was it like for you? Talk about reading these letters that the two exchanged, which are just the ones that you were able to see and the ones that are left. Talk to us about what the research was like for you, exploring this relationship, exploring this time period, exploring these women, and exploring the White House during this time. Talk to us about your research that you put into this novel.
It was like walking through a national park. It really was. I mean, over here are the canyons, over here are the beautiful gardens, over here are the dashing rivers. To go to the Roosevelt Library and to be in the archives where you go in not with a pen and not with a cell phone, but with a pad of paper and a pencil, and they bring you 3 boxes at a time. There were 18 boxes of letters. And the reason you say that those are the ones that are left is because Lorena herself burned several hundred that she felt were too indiscreet, too indicative of the passionate affair. And the letters themselves are beautiful. First of all, back in the day, people had beautiful handwriting, so they're physically beautiful. And also they are just passionate expressions of love by 2 women who were already middle-aged, who never expected to have a great love affair. Eleanor had already been disappointed in love. She had married Franklin. He had had an affair with her dear friend, who was also her secretary. She had offered him a divorce. He had decided not to get divorced, largely because it would make him politically unacceptable, and also because his mother had told him that if he got divorced, she wouldn't let him have any of their money, and that was a considerable amount of cash. And so they stayed together. And it's not that they didn't love each other, but he was not her great romance. And I think to be on her way to the White House and falling passionately in love was a very difficult and exciting combination. And that's really where the romance begins.
What was it like for you to be able to physically hold copies of these letters and to explore a romance that the people had known about, had been rumored about? What was that like for you to kind of explore this relationship and then to be able to tell a story in your own viewpoint?
Well, the pleasure of telling the story was certainly creating the story from my own stance, but even more creating the character of Lorena Hickok, who could then tell the story, who could see Franklin as a great president and a rival and a tricky friend, who could see Eleanor as an extraordinary first lady and an admirable leader and icon, and also a very difficult girlfriend sometimes. And to hold the letters, you know, I had read the biographies and I had read reference to these relationships, and I had thought from the references that it was equivocal, that, you know, well, maybe they had a physical relationship, but maybe Eleanor Roosevelt was just a very effusive Victorian lady. And then to read the letters and to see sentences like, "I'm so sorry, darling, that when you called to say goodnight, I could not say to you, I love you and I adore you, because little Jimmy was standing next to the telephone," is not the kind of thing that I say to my pals. Or, "I put my hand on your photograph and weep because you are not here next to me." I mean, they loved each other. And the fact that it didn't end in perfect happiness is a real grief. But the love itself didn't end. And part of what I wanted to write about, as I say, was what it's like in the long run, not just when everybody is glossy and young.
I think that's a poignant way to say it. What I found interesting as well, just hearing you speak about this story and the way that you wrote it, the character, from the point of view that you told it from, I mean, she gave up a lot to be in the position that she was in. She had a remarkable career and is a role model to me as an aspiring journalist. But she worked so hard to get to the point to where she was, but then she also gave that up to pursue the friendship, the romance, the relationship, and to be in the White House. Talk to me about that aspect.
Well, I think it was a difficult thing for her to give up her career. She had really pushed very hard. She was one of the few newspaper women in America, and she was probably the only one whose byline people recognized at the time. And on the other hand, she was not only a person of integrity, her partner and the woman she was in love with was a person of extremely high principle. And even though I think in many ways Eleanor Roosevelt didn't know how the world worked, Lorena did. And she understood that she could not, in good conscience, be a reporter and be living with Eleanor Roosevelt and protecting Eleanor and Franklin and the family. When she had, for example, Franklin's acceptance speech and his inaugural speeches in her hands 2 days before the events took place, she could have scooped everybody, and whoever had employed her, any newspaper, would have scooped every other newspaper if only she had given out the material. And she understood that that was no way to be a journalist. We have maybe a little more difficulty seeing what the lines are now, but she had no difficulty seeing what her obligations were then. And she acted on it, and it was very difficult. It was a tremendous loss for her. And it seems to me she didn't really recover until 20 years later, when she began writing again in a serious way and produced 5 books, even though she had lost the sight in one eye due to diabetes. She continued to churn out the books, and they were published, and they were read.
Wow, incredible story. I just find it so fascinating. What a great time to be publishing this book and to be telling this story, because you look at, even though that it was some time ago in the 1930s, 1940s that we're looking at this happening, and what a remarkable time to be showcasing it today. Female empowerment, you're showcasing this wonderful story of these two women who share this beautiful relationship. What a great time to tell this story and to release this book today. Also, with what's happening in Washington, people really want this inside look. Were you thinking about that as you were writing it?
I wasn't thinking about it when I was writing it.
Just happened to be.
It seems to have worked out. I wasn't thinking it. You know, when I'm writing, I am usually thinking, oh, nobody's going to read this outside the immediate family, and I hope that the immediate family will read it.
You have a big immediate family then, I'll tell you that.
But now, I feel like people are so interested in how politics works from the inside. And the view of inside that White House is so different than the White House that we look at now. Among other things, so many people lived in the White House. It was run down. There was no effort to make it more fancy. It really was like a big boarding house. And in addition to the Roosevelts, they had 5 grown children who had 19 divorces between them. So there was a lot of coming and going, people engaged in working out their custody arrangements, bringing in the kids, taking out the kids. And there was a cabinet member who had lost his wife, and he moved in there with his 5-year-old daughter, and famously, Eleanor used to bring her to meetings when they were short on babysitters. There was Louis Howe, who was Franklin Roosevelt's dying campaign manager, who lived in the White House until his death. There was Franklin Roosevelt's secretary, who lived in the White House when she was healthy on the 3rd floor, and even after her stroke, continued to live in the White House and be looked after by White House nurses. So it had this sort of big, rough and tumble backstage quality. On the other hand, the other thing you saw was this profound commitment to democracy. This feeling that part of the job of being in the White House was to embody American virtues, whichever side of the aisle you were on. And I think it's probably a pleasure for people to read about those kinds of people and that kind of leadership even now.
So it somewhat mirrors what's happening today, but also not the reflection that people are seeing today. But I think people are curious because of the administration, somewhat of a reality TV, because our president today was in reality TV. People want to see what's going on inside the White House. So giving them a look, even if it was decades ago, giving a look at what happened inside the White House, I think people are curious for that.
I do think so. I mean, I feel that one of the strongest elements, White Houses is going to become a TV miniseries, and I'll be getting to work on the script. And I think one of the elements we all felt was going to be really appealing is backstage in the White House, being on the 2nd floor, being on the 3rd floor, seeing what breakfast is like when Winston Churchill is marching through with nothing but a towel wrapped around his middle, holding a glass of brandy at 11 o'clock in the morning.
That's very exciting. So congratulations not only on the novel itself, but a mini-series coming up. Can you give us any details on when we might be able to see that? So if people are going to head out to buy the book, they can read it, consume it, and then get prepared for the mini-series.
Yeah, you read it, you consume it, and I'll write the script as fast as I can.
Okay, so we'll leave that note on that. Talk to us a little bit about you fell into this novel while researching and preparing while you were writing something else. Now you're going to start writing the mini-series, a script for that. I've heard that you have a few other things kind of on the back burner. Did you fall into those while you were researching this, or how did those come about, and what do you think is in the works?
Well, I think there are a couple of things in the works. I like the idea of falling into them, which is sometimes how it feels. But the truth is I started writing kind of late. I didn't start writing until I was about 36. And so I don't feel like I have a lot of time to waste. So I have another novel that I've begun work on, which is about Marie Curie and her really eccentric, brilliant, peculiar, stubborn, politically active family over the course of about 40 years. In Europe, in both Poland and in Paris, leading right into World War II, with their role in radium, which was definitely a significant role to play in atomic warfare, which was not their wish, but nevertheless their result. And I'm working on another television show, actually 2 possible television shows that are just sort of more, not miniseries, that are sort of longer run series, and we will see what happens. Everything in television is always a little bit smokes and mirrors, and so I never quite believe it until I see it on the screen, but so far so good.
So far, so good. I think that's also very exciting, and it has to make you feel good when your work reaches so many different audiences. And as a consumer of literature, I find it compelling when an author such as yourself can span so many different audiences. So my question to you is, you've now worked writing short stories and succeeded at that. You've now worked in not fiction and historical fiction. Are going to, I've heard, maybe work in some mystery. My question to you is, how are you able to succeed working in multiple genres, writing in TV, it sounds like, or when it comes to good writing and reaching audiences and captivating people, is it just the same formula?
I think it is the same principle, which is a good sentence is a good sentence is a good sentence. People respond to storytelling that matters to the teller, that is not just on the surface, but also has some kind of heart, some kind of connection, some kind of drive to it. And I think most people, like me, are really interested in other people. We're really interested in humanity and what people do. It's why reality TV is so popular, because we like to see other people being themselves. And we're no different than the audiences that used to watch the Greek tragedy, in which you watch people get in their own way and the disastrous and hilarious consequences, because that's what it is to be a human being, and that's why we like to read about them.
I find that so interesting, because you often find authors or see authors who are wildly successful. They find a genre and they stick with it, but I think it's wonderful that you are able to work within multiple genres and that you're able to explore these and hopefully have some fun with it.
I feel very lucky. I feel very lucky to do work that I find hard to do, but really gratifying.
And very compelling at that. You are based in New England, so we always are appreciative of that. Making your way to an unlikely story in Plainville, Massachusetts. So if you're interested in meeting Miss Bloom and getting a copy of White Houses, you can meet her tonight, question and answer session. So you're working your way kind of through New England, headed up to Boston as well on this book tour. Where else is the book tour taking you?
Well, after the Harvard Bookstore, which is on Thursday night, I am off to the Simsbury Public Library back in Connecticut, and then Washington, D.C., then Dallas, Austin, and Houston. If you have friends in Texas, please tell them. And then back to Brooklyn, and then Manhattan, and then I have about a month off before I go to Australia, and then on to Europe.
I think it's always interesting, too, that people are, we were talking a moment ago kind of about the crown, and people are interested in that royalty aspect. I think people are interested in the American presidents, kind of our own royalty, right? So do you think this is kind of wide-ranging?
I think very much. I think White Houses, both as a book and as a television show, is very much kind of a wilder, woollier, much more informal American version of The Crown.
I think it's very wide-reaching. Already has received a lot of attention. People saying this is one of the books you must read of 2018. I'm curious, what do you like to read?
Oh, well, I'm way behind in contemporary fiction because I'm behind in my reading. I love to read mysteries for just sort of relaxation. I read poetry when I'm writing because it makes that other part of the brain kind of loosen up. And I feel that when I pause, which I think will be probably later this summer, there's just going to be a stack of great American novels on my nightstand waiting for me to read them.
I think it's always fun to get authors' takes on what they find enjoyable, and if they're able to take a pause to be able to enjoy other works, or if they're just like, no, I'm done. Do you ever write just for pleasure, for enjoyment? Maybe journal or write poetry for yourself?
I'm a terrible poetry writer. I am such a terrible poet that I wrote a lovely poem for my daughter's 16th birthday, and I handed it to her, and this is a sweet girl, and you have to understand that
teenagers sometimes aren't nice.
Well, I was going to say, if you get kindness and compassion from a 16-year-old girl, you know you're in trouble. And she read the poem, and she was like, "Oh, thank you, Mommy. It was really sweet." And I thought, well, I'm just terrible at this, and I should not continue to write poetry. And I don't. But I love to read it. I love to read it for the music and for the imagery. But I think for myself, I enjoy correspondence with friends, emails, things like that. But there is a pleasure in the writing for me, as other writers have said. It is a great pleasure to have written. It's awfully hard while you're writing. And that pleasure is good enough for me.
I can appreciate that. Amy Bloom, New York Times bestselling author and award-winning writer. You can catch her at An Unlikely Story tonight if you're interested, or maybe some other time in Boston. She's making a New England tour, and then she's off around America and then overseas. So maybe if you're headed to Australia for a trip, you can catch her there as well.
Please come if you're in Sydney.
A friendly face. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a true pleasure. Hopefully you can catch the book as well, and then the mini-series. So nice that you're able to work on it yourself as well. I'm sure.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we are going to take a quick pause as we get set up here for our next guest on Go Local Live. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us back here at the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center on Go Local Live. I'm Molly O'Brien. I'm joined with our friend Bonnie Epstein with the Rhode Island Museum of Science and Art. Bonnie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, congratulations. Last time we talked to you, Ramosa just established itself in a permanent place, yes. And now you are doing more, expanding, and then continuing to go on the road. So congratulations to that. We wanted to have you back in to not only do a science project and maybe an art project too, but to talk to you a little bit about what's going on. Had school vacation week, had some camp going on, and continue to talk. So talk to us a little bit about how things have been going since we last saw you.
Well, great, actually. And I should say we're very grateful for any publicity, especially on Go Local, because we are, a lot of the people who come through word of mouth. And we're a fairly small site, but anecdotally, people have stayed for hours. We're open, our hours are usually from 1 to 5 on Thursday and Friday, and from 12 to 5 on Saturday and Sunday. This vacation week, we were open actually for a camp on Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday we were open from 1 to 5, although it's almost over now. But and we'll again be open on Thursday and Friday, so and Saturday and Sunday. So hopefully a lot of people will be able to come and experience hands-on learning, and we're really excited about that. So that's what we've been doing. We've had school groups come in since we've been open. We, as I said, we had our vacation camp, which was only 2 days because the Providence Public Schools only have 2 days of vacation. So
and then back to reality.
Exactly, but it's been great.
And more people are finding out that you have established this permanent space, which is incredible. But through funding, through programming, through grant work, you're able to expand what you do on the road. Talk to me a little bit about about the funding to be able to take the programming that you have and taking it to libraries and schools and provide that education, and why that's important.
Well, we started actually as a museum without walls, as we said. So we got our 501c3, our nonprofit status in 2010, and up until this June, we didn't have a space. So we really relied on libraries and boys and girls clubs and after-school programs and in-school programs to do these programs. Programs rather a lot, but to do these experiences. And our rubric is that whatever we did, it had to be hands-on, as open-ended as possible, and also a catalyst for future learning. So when we were asked to do auditorium shows, we had to say we can't do that because it's not sufficiently hands-on, because we really wanted kids to be physically involved in this process of experimenting. Our mission is to kindle curiosity and encourage experimentation. And so as far as funding goes, we actually have a very exciting grant that we're part of it. We're not the people who wrote it, but Fab Newport, Providence Public Library, and Providence Community Libraries are the primaries on this grant, but they very thoughtfully brought us in. And this will enable us to do library programs throughout the spring semester, and I think into the summer, which will be wonderful. These will be free to the public. We don't have dates for them yet, unfortunately, but do keep an eye out for them. And it also includes some money for field trips into the center as well. So having people come into the center simply allows us to have them experience our sort of larger exhibits, like Air Tube, which blows stuff all over the place, essentially, and you can build your own thing to put into it, whereas obviously the outreach programs tend to be a little bit smaller. But they are facilitated by a person, so the nice thing is if you have a program, there'll actually be somebody to talk to you a little bit about it and encourage you. The one thing we say about our space is that our docents are more permission givers than anything else. They'll come in and say, oh yeah, you can do that. Absolutely do that. Touch it, take it apart. Please do it. So
try it, see
exactly.
it.
Try it, touch it, experiment.
See what happens.
Exactly. So rather than here's what you're supposed to do. So
I love that.
Yeah, and I should also say that during the summer we have this will be our 7th or 8th year, I can't remember, of doing the Rhode Island Public Library Summer Reading Program, which for us actually doesn't involve as much reading, although it does, as I said, to fit in with literature. It brings people into the libraries, and every year there's a theme, and this year the theme is, I believe, Libraries Rock. I know rock was in it, and so we're doing the children's version of that is essentially making musical instruments, and the teen version of that is rock stacking, which is, if it's something you haven't seen,
you can't go anywhere without seeing rock stack.
Exactly, and it's really kind of fun. It's like one of those things where a moment to learn, a lifetime to master, and you find yourself, just sort of starting to be like, oh, I'm going to balance them on their ends, and so we start, like with most things, a little slideshow of what other people have done, maybe just to give you ideas, and then we're like, go for it. And we're not just stacking rocks because, again, with Rimosa, we tend to take things sort of a step further. We never do what other people do. We do it a little bit differently. So not only are we bringing some rocks for people to practice stacking with, but in case you live in an urban area maybe and rocks aren't as available, we're bringing speakers to stack as well. So getting people to figure out how to stack. The most important thing is that they're weirdly shaped. Stacking boxes, anyone can do that, right? But boots, a little more complicated.
A little bit harder.
So yeah.
Let's talk about a new exhibit that you have, and then we're going to get into our project.
Sure.
You have a new exhibit called Rainbow Drum.
Yes.
It sounds fun. I saw a picture of it.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about what that is, what children and adults can do, and how you got the inspiration for it.
So absolutely. So this isn't, I suppose it's not as new an exhibit because when we first started, we brought it out, a variation of it at Waterfire. But it went away because our first variation had water in it. It leaked. The pipes kept, kids would pull on the pipes and they would come off. So we went through a lot of iterations. This latest one has sort of thick but transparent acrylic tubes and literally flip-flops that you just hit over the top, and it makes this lovely sound. I can't even describe what it sounds like, but sort of like boom, boom, but in different tones. We were inspired by Blue Man Group actually, and people just want to hit stuff and have it make a sound, and so we, as I said, this is several iterations, but it's finally in a place where we feel it's strong enough that it can interact with the public, and so that is now on our exhibit floor at 763 Westminster. And sort of because that moved in, one of our other ones has moved off exhibit, and that was actually always part of our concept, was that our exhibits would change fairly rapidly, so that every 6 months or so you would come and there would be something a little bit different. So we are hoping to have new exhibits come in with that grant that I mentioned, the Providence Make Your Life grant, actually, and it is supported by the City of Providence. Thank you very much. We will have 4 new exhibits that will cycle both through our site and also through libraries throughout Providence.
Which I think is pretty cool, though, the fact that you were working on getting this new exhibit just right, tweaking it, changing it. I mean, that's almost part of the scientific experiment, right?
Absolutely.
You're working through the life cycle, the process, tweaking it, finding the variable that worked, and then changing that throughout the course. So you're part of figuring out how science works and art works. So that's, you can teach kids about that along the way, right?
Absolutely. We always say we're nothing if not flexible, and everything we do is sort of designed about that, where you do something and you're like, well, that didn't work out. And so you problem solve, why didn't it work? Okay, let's, brainstorm some solutions, try some solutions, try it again. And you're like, well, that didn't work either. Let's try it again. So
all part of the teaching process.
Absolutely. The learning process as well.
All part of the teaching, learning, and creative process.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what you brought in for us today, because we're going to learn something here. I posted a question on my Facebook page. What was one of your favorite science experiments as a kid? So I always think it's fun. Some of those learning experiments, processes, whatever you want to call it, projects. When you were growing up, what did you bring for us today? Because we're going to do something cool. I kind of had a preview back here, and hopefully you're going to be able to see this. So what are we going to do?
So so this actually was not something I did as a kid. This was something that was
new.
Yeah, exactly. The first part was part of an NSF kit about nanoscale, believe it or not, and then we altered it as we tend to do. So we start out with a flat tray about halfway full of water. The water is clear, it's uncolored, and uncolored nail polish.
Okay.
Clear nail polish. Okay.
I'm going to do it too.
Do you want to do it? Actually, maybe you should do it instead.
Okay.
Okay.
So can we both do it?
All right, we can probably both do it. So what we're going to do is literally just hold this up and allow a single drop of nail polish to fall into the water. There we go. And what you may not be able to see is that it immediately spreads out like an oil slick. It does have that smell. And what you also maybe can't see, but if you do this at home, and it's really easy to do at home, you can see that.
You definitely can't see it on the camera, but
yeah,
it looks
okay.
cool.
Trust me.
It goes, woo!
Exactly. It spreads out, and it looks, again, there's like iridescent colors, again, kind of like an oil slick. And so what you can see, well, I don't know if you can see this or not, but the initial experiment had people sort of slide black pieces of, this is like cardstock paper, and go ahead and sort of slide it under, and you can lift it up. So you put it straight down and kind of push it. There we go. And you're actually lifting up this, it looks like a bubble film, and go ahead and then just lift it up. Kind of like that. I know, well now it looks, I was going to say, and what it does is, again, I don't know if you can see it, but it's sort of iridescent, so you can see the iridescence.
Pretty.
So yeah, so what we've done is we sort of varied that a little bit, where we've added a wire. And so when we do this experiment, or this activity, I guess, it's hard to call it experiment really, but we bring wire. Exactly, activity. So this is wire that you can get at any craft store. You can even get it at flower shops and stuff like that. So
Should I drop another one in?
Sure, yeah. Okay. It's really easily bent. And so I'm just going to take one here. And
oh, that one didn't spread out as much.
Well, it might have been a bigger drop, I don't know. But that part doesn't even really matter that much. So, and I'm just gonna make a shape. I don't even know what, like a kind of like a butterfly shape maybe. As I said, it's really easy to bend here. So it's like a butterfly or a bow tie, I don't know what. Anyway.
Okay.
And pull this up. And then we're gonna dip the wire in and see if we can catch some of this iridescent, very, very thin material. Oops. It comes out looking like something you sneezed, actually. But
there's no wrong way to do it, everybody.
It's something you can play. So this side is very, very thick, but this side is very thin, and it's almost like you catch a bubble and just are able to keep it. We have some examples here that has been done before. This one's a swirl.
Oh, look at mine.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. You made like a net. So somebody did a swirl, somebody did like a spiral, and that's kind of caught in a number of different ways. So this may not be the most photogenic thing, but if you do it at home, it is really interesting. So, and that's actually part of one of the things. So I was trained as a scientist, and so when I see something happen, I think, you know, why? Why does it do this? And so I'm struck to figure out a why. Whereas the artists that we know, they say they are struck with the how. How can I use this? So.
Oh, that is super interesting,
yeah.
right? Because everybody's looking at it in different ways.
Exactly.
Where I'm just thinking, how can I? Yeah.
So maybe you're more of the artist. How can I use this?
I'm just thinking.
So here, and this actually. Sorry, I saved
Oh,
most of it.
that one's good.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I took most of it actually. So, but it's kind of like as I said, it's like catching a bubble film. So, and the reason this is all about nanoscale is because the iridescence, as I said, we start out with clear water, you add clear nail polish, but if there's iridescence, where did it come from? And I kind of like hesitate to give the answer. You know, sometimes the mystery is even better, but.
This one's fun.
Yeah, exactly. That was a neat one. And here, this one, as I said, it's kind of in 3 dimensions. That's really interesting. So it's because this film is so thin. It's about 500 nanometers thick, which is the same thickness as the skin of a bubble, and we all know bubbles make that lovely iridescent color. And it actually is roughly the same wavelength or same thickness as wavelengths of light.
Oh.
And that's why there's iridescence, because you get what am I trying to say here?
I don't know.
I know, exactly.
You're the scientist.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to, the interference. You're getting interference with wavelengths of light. They go from, like, you can add another drop if it's getting, so from
I kinda like it.
700 nanometers is red, down to 200, which is blue, and 400 is like green, and this is about 500. So the light kind of catches from the back of it to the front of it.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah.
Bonnie,
Anyway.
that is so excellent. This has been
good.
so much fun. If you are interested, I'm going to spill all this water. If you're
fine.
interested in anything that has to do with the Rhode Island Museum of Science and Art, we will have a link on our webpage. Go check them out. They have extended hours through this week. And then, of course, lots of programs, activities, all kinds of new stuff happening. So make sure you check them out. And hopefully we give you something to do when the weather might not be quite as nice. Or you can go do it outside, right?
Absolutely,
Set it up out on your patio.
Yeah, so it's just something different to do with stuff you can find at home.
That's right.
So, yeah.
Super fun. Bonnie,
That's
thank you. Such a pleasure as always.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming over on this lovely, beautiful day.
Great.
Please, everyone, hang tight as we scoot this and get set up here for our next guest on GoLocal Live.
Thanks.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on GoLocal Live in the Navigant and Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm happy to welcome award-winning cartoonist Mark Parisi. He joins us via Skype. Hi Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing very good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us today. Mark is well known for his award-winning comic, Off the Mark, which has been published since 1987. Mark, you've been doing this for quite some time, so wanted to chat with you a little bit about your cartoon, Off the Mark, today. And then, of course, your new book series with HarperCollins, Marty Pants.
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, let's get started. So let's start off with your new book series, Marty Pants. It's going to be a 3-series piece. The first 2 books have been published. The first one, Do Not Open, and the second one recently just came out, Keep Your Paws Off. So let's start off with a little bit. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the series, how it came to be?
Do Not Open, right here. The first Marty Pants book first came about when I got an email from Dave Linker, an editor at HarperCollins, who had seen my Off the Mark cartoon and asked if I was interested in writing this type of hybrid book, which is basically alternates storytelling between text and graphics.
Oh, do you want to hold it up a little bit? If you're holding it
I'm
up.
sorry. How's that?
Yeah,
Good?
there we go.
Good. Good. Text and graphics. Like that, and basically it's for 8 to 12-year-olds, what they call reluctant readers. A lot of times boys who don't make the transition from from picture books into chapter books. So it's a funny type of read. And Marty Pants is basically a school kid whose imagination kind of runs away from him. So I guess it's kind of a combination between maybe like the Wimpy Kid style book with a little bit of X-Files in there, and you don't know what is real and what isn't sometimes.
What a fun concept and what a fun idea. Also with the idea of kind of encouraging kids to help them along and help them get transition along in their reading. Did you have an interest in writing, or did this just kind of come to be?
Well, I never really wanted to write a chapter book just because there were so many words. That seemed like a lot to do. And same with a graphic novel. That seemed like so much drawing and so much planning. But when I first saw, I guess, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, that looked like a fun book to do. So that kind of piqued my interest in writing. And the timing of the text with the graphics was kind of the way that I wrote my Off the Mark cartoons, which would be text, and then you look at the graphic, and that would be where the joke was. So for me, this type of writing kind of clicked.
I mean, that's pretty cool. I was going to ask you, what's it like for you to be able to develop a character for a lot longer? Because we see in your cartoons, you usually have a character, and maybe they will appear a little bit later on, but for this, you take a character and you don't just see it once, you have to develop it a little bit farther along throughout the course of 3 books. What was that like for you to be able to give them a little bit more depth and build a story around them? Was it exciting? Was it weird? Was it scary? Was it all the above?
I guess all of the above. That's a great question, because with Off the Mark, it's basically one frozen moment in time. There is no story arc. There is no character development. So that was an entirely new thing for me to try to tackle. And I wasn't sure if I could do it, because I wasn't sure I understood characters and how to make a character that people would be interested in. So I kind of did what I think a lot of writers do, or some like Saturday Night Live actors do, which is basically take a personality quirk that maybe one person had one time that you met, and just build something around that. So instead of starting from scratch, trying to start from something that you know exists in somebody's mind somewhere, and see. And it was difficult, and I was very happy that I could do it. I wasn't sure I could do it until I tried, and my editor was great as far as kind of guiding me.
It's always nice to have a good support team with you. And you do have a good support team. It's my understanding that you have some family that supported you along the way throughout your career as well, right?
Oh, yes, definitely. That's always, any support you can get when you're in this line of work is welcome.
That's good. So talk to us a little bit about the two books you recently just released. You talked to us a little bit about Do Not Open, which came out in
Right.
May, and then the second book, Keep Your Paws Off, just came out this month, and you're also going to be appearing at an Unlikely Story coming up this weekend. What's it like for you to be able to talk to people and to be able to sign books and to be able to release these novels in a series?
It's a lot of fun. I'm going to an Unlikely Story, which will be my second time there. They have a great venue for this type of thing on the second floor. It's a great bookstore. So that there'll be a PowerPoint presentation, and I'll be doing some easel drawing, and I'll take questions, and it's a great setting for that, and doing book signing later. And to be able to talk to people and go to schools and talk, it's really great, because most of what I do is just sitting at a table somewhere and drawing. So to be actually able to get feedback and to get people interested in it and hear the laughs and hear, the interest, it's a lot of fun. I would like to do more of it.
That's incredible, and it's nice to be able to. I would think that that's pretty cool to be able to get some feedback and to get some interaction. And I think it's nice to be able, since your career has spanned for a couple decades, it must be nice to be able to reach a different generation as well.
Yes, the off the mark cartoons kind of don't necessarily have a target market there. Whichever ones you think are funny, you think are funny. Maybe you don't get this one, but maybe you'll get tomorrow's. Where this one is definitely aimed at a certain generation, and in a way, it helps me feel more relevant, because I wonder sometimes with my references if I'm kind of missing the, because everything changes so fast, and sometimes I'm not even aware of what I don't even know, what I should know. So it's nice to be able to write something for the younger crowd, and have it hopefully appreciated and do well. I tried not to write it exclusively for kids, so that if adults read it, kids of any age will find something in it that hopefully will make it funny. I wanted it to be funny for me when I read it.
You want it to be funny for just about anybody who might, maybe people have been fans of your cartoons for a couple years or since the 80s, and so maybe they have a t-shirt or a mug with their favorite cartoon on it, and if they're like, hey, I recognize this cartoon, maybe they could pick it up and enjoy it too, right?
Yeah, that's the idea. It's basically the same humor.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's pretty cool. Let's talk a little bit about your career. I'm always interested. I just spoke to an author earlier, and I asked her if she ever writes for fun. I'm interested in you. You've been doing sketch work, and you've been doing Off the Mark for quite some time. Do you ever just sit around and draw for fun, or is it strictly a job and a career at this point?
I very seldom draw for fun anymore. I know some artists who do, but there's so much to do anyway in drawing that occasionally I'll draw something just to draw something silly, but it's not much. It's usually with a purpose these days.
That makes sense. That's fair. Let's talk about the Off the Mark series. Like we mentioned before, been published since 1987. That's pretty remarkable. Talk to us just a little bit about how your work has grown, evolved, and changed over that time.
Well, the drawing's gotten better. It certainly evolved that way. With just the way society changes, it's funny how you have to really keep up. And I've been doing this for over 30 years, and 30 years a lot changes. So a lot is basically just what's happening at the time. Not that my cartoons are political or editorial, but they're social in a way, with things that everyone is going through. So I look at some cartoons I've done years ago, and they're obsolete. That technology doesn't exist anymore, or no one knows what I'm talking about. So there's always kind of trying to keep up with what's going on.
You mentioned just a couple minutes ago kind of your process for how you set it up, but can you explain to us that again? Do you start off with the commentary or the wording and then go to the pictures, or do you just get an idea, or do you start kind of doodling a character and then fill it in later? How do you set up what the cartoon is going to be?
It, any and all of the above. Sometimes it's if I get the idea all at once, that's great. That's so easy. There's not a lot of work involved. But most of the time, it's starting with just kind of a germ of something, whether it's a word, a phrase, the word unsubscribe, just how you unsubscribe from emails, and just take that and say, where can I plug this in? What can this apply to? And a lot of times it's taking two elements and combining them somehow to come up with something new. And sometimes it takes a while to get there. And I usually go to a cafe, Barnes and Noble cafe in Saugus, and bring a notebook one day a week and just sit there all day and try to combine things and think of words and draw pictures. And hopefully by the end of the day, I have enough for the week, but there's no guarantee. It's one of those things that works really well sometimes, and other times it seems like the hardest thing in the world.
I feel like it would be really hard to have them be good all the time. So did you ever get to a point where you're like, oh, I just want to give up? Or how did you get to a point where you're like, oh, I feel like I'm doing okay and this can be my career?
Well, I still put out cartoons where I go, oh, I can't wait for this day to end because, the deadline comes. I had to do this cartoon. I could have done it better, but I only have so much time. But one person told me that, and I think this is true, the longer you do it, your worst cartoons are better. So that's one of the big, sometimes your best cartoons are just as good as your best cartoons when you start out, but your worst cartoons are better. So the whole boat rises up a little bit just because you're not as bad. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's fair. So I was sitting in the office and I'm scrolling through your website and I'm clicking on, just looking at some of the past ones, and I'm just sitting in my office giggling, looking at some of these. And our producer goes, "Oh, are you looking at the cartoons?" Yeah, and I'm just sitting in my chair, just laughing out loud. That has to make you feel pretty good to think that you're helping bring joy to people's lives. Did you ever think about that when this is what you were doing?
Well, what you said just made me feel great. So. It's I guess I was talking to a school and I can't remember what the question was, but I told him that I got into it more for the funny than for the art. I would rather if I could pick one, I would rather have my job be something that was funny than just drawing that wasn't funny.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely in it for the laughs. That's the part that's the part I'm proudest of. If I can do something funny that makes someone laugh.
Do you can ever consider yourself a comedian?
Stand up?
Yeah, would you ever think about doing that?
I don't know that I have I think the closest thing are these presentations that I do for Marty Pants and Off the Mark. I can show the drawings, I can have a few funny lines, and then I can step off stage and do the same performance again.
Yeah, just do the same thing. I think that's pretty cool. And looking at your cartoons, it seems like you incorporate a lot of animals and you do incorporate some technology. Do you feel like that's part of who you are, or do you find that people can relate to that kind of stuff the most?
Animals, pets, cats and dogs mostly are probably my favorite subject to do. So that's definitely part of me. And technology, who doesn't love their phone, or so that's also part of me. But I also know that there's so much of that going on now, and it's new territory. I wasn't doing cell phone cartoons in 1987, so it's a category that I can dig into without worrying about repeating myself.
That's true, and it'll be funny to see those, 20 years from now, it'd be funny to go back and look and be like, oh, haha, remember those things.
That's what I worry about too. In 10 years, are they going to be all obsolete? But I guess I can't worry about that. I have to do what's funny today and hope it lasts.
But it also will be nice to see, because then we have somewhat of a record of it, right?
Oh, right, some kind of marker. And oh yeah, I remember when the world was like that.
Exactly. Remind us of all how weird we were.
Yeah, you can look back now. You can look back now at the cartoons and see how weird we were.
That's so true. Let's talk a little bit about, just continuing to talk a little bit more about Off the Mark. Your cartoons can be found all over the place. I read on your website. Speaking of weird, your cartoons have been found on, you know, T-shirts, mugs, calendars, all over the place. And you also said on some pretty weird stuff. Have you ever walked someplace or shown up somewhere and gone, oh, I recognize that?
Yes, I've seen my cartoons hung up on different places. There was one place in particular. It was a convenience store in, was it Lynn? And the name of the convenience, it was something like the convenience store was I can't remember the name, but it was something like Joe's Convenience or something like that. And so I did a cartoon. That gave me an idea about we are closed, we will be open at Joe's Convenience or something like that. And I went into that store and they had it by the counter. I didn't say, "Oh, that's my cartoon," but it was very funny to see that go full circle.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Talk to us about some of the people that you've worked with, the clientele. I mean, you've worked with and worked for a vast array of people. I was reading ranging from the U.S. military to the Dixie Chicks and everywhere in between. Talk to us just about some of the clientele that you've had.
The Dixie Chicks came about because I was doing a cartoon for Billboard magazine for a few years. And so the Dixie Chicks had seen one, and you know how they had their incidents, you know, a few years ago with the radio station, Cumulus Broadcasting. You know, they weren't playing, they were being banned. So they saw my cartoon and they liked it, so they asked me to do their Christmas card, which was fun. So I did the Dixie Chicks Christmas card. The U.S. military thing came about because, and a lot of things come about because of the website, where someone might be searching cartoons and they find offthemark.com and then find me. The U.S. military thing was an anti-binge drinking campaign because I guess binge drinking is a big issue. In the military, so the idea was to do funny cartoons about the downfall, the bad things that can happen to you if you binge drink, and that was fun because I could draw things that I could never draw in a family newspaper.
That makes a lot of sense, and hopefully it helped some people as well.
Yes.
Well, really looking forward to what comes next. I can't wait to pick up a couple of books. What are you looking forward to when you go to these groups? Because not only are you speaking at an unlikely story, but you have a couple other stops along the way, which we will put up a link to on our website. But you have a couple other stops, and you get to meet and interact with these people. What are you looking forward to chatting about?
Well, first, I just like to see if people show up. That's always great if people show up. I like to talk about how my childhood influenced this book. What books?
Marty Pants.
And how I came about being an artist to begin with. So I talk a lot about that, and I'll talk about, you know, the plots of the book and a little bit, maybe a couple spoilers, not a lot.
Wonderful. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today here on GoLocal Live. I really do appreciate your time. If you're interested, where do you like to get your books?
I usually go to Barnes & Noble, sometimes Amazon, I think like everyone else. But if I go to a store, it's usually been Barnes & Noble just because it's close. But there's a bookstore in Gloucester called The Bookstore, which is good as well. So what about you? Where do you get your books?
We have a couple local bookstores that I like to shop at, or the library. I'm kind of a library gal.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a library gal.
Yeah, the independent bookstores are great. There's so many.
Always so good. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to say thank you to Mark and all of our guests today. We're wrapping up here on the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Kate Nagel kicks things off here in just a moment, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Molly O'Brien. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 4 o'clock News and Politics show this Wednesday. I'd like to welcome in Representative Greg Amore from East Providence into the studio.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for taking the time to join us this vacation week.
My pleasure.
Although we know it's not a vacation for most educators who are busy with the task at hand, but wanted to bring you in because you're going to be introducing legislation to address school safety measures. And when you're back in session, we'll see more about this, but really wanted to talk with viewers here a little bit more about this. So tell us a little bit about why you came up with what you did. And I know there's sort of two separate angles to it. So let's talk about the school resource officer angle.
Sure. So when I was a freshman legislator, I signed on to Representative Kazarian's bill that would have enhanced school social workers and school psychologists. That did not move anywhere based on funding concerns. Since then, we have had school shooting after school shooting after school shooting. And, you know, every American can walk into an airport and see that there's a complete change in how we secure airports after 9/11. But the same can't be said for our schools. And so the two pieces of legislation that will be introduced next week, one deals with enhancing the school resource officer program that already exists in Rhode Island, and the other deals with some school construction that would enhance, you know, technology and other school security means as far as you know, engineering and design.
So the first one, addressing school resource officers, is that you want more per number of students.
Right. So most high schools in Rhode Island have a school resource officer embedded right now. Most. Many middle schools have a school resource officer embedded. Elementary schools, by and large, in Rhode Island do not. My proposal would put a school resource officer in every single school, and maybe two in schools that have large footprints and large student populations.
And you know, you talk about the budgetary constraints that this that this puts forth. You know, I'm sure you've talked with parents and teachers. I mean, is there just a sense that a conversation needs to happen as to how to make this money available? Because I can't imagine too many people disagree with you.
No, you know, by and large, it's a positive response. But what we do see is that there are always concerns that the municipality will pick up the tab. Is the state going to pick up the tab? We know we have a budget shortfall in the state always. Is there a federal role here? And I've spoken to Congressman Cicilline on this subject. I think there is a federal role here. We have Homeland Security dollars that are targeted to preventing terrorism. This is terrorism, and this is Homeland Security. And so I think, and if you remember, in 2013, the Obama administration put forth a huge federal grant for resource officers.
Okay.
And many municipalities took advantage of that, many states. But then after the grant runs out, how do you finance it? We have to find a way. We have to prioritize.
And so you talked as well about putting them in elementary schools, and you've, I'm sure, had conversations with folks. It's sort of, they're at the middle and high school levels now, especially because they deal with discipline issues, not just the most dire situations, but just what we've seen with all age groups. I mean, it might not be addressing the discipline issue with small children, but from simply the safety aspect.
Sure. I think a good resource officer model actually doesn't deal with day-to-day discipline. It doesn't deal with classroom discipline. It doesn't deal with somebody violating the dress code. They deal with safety concerns, the school atmosphere, and then they serve as a confidant for the students who can go to them with anything because they've built relationships and say, hey, I've heard this or I've seen that. Can you act upon this? Can you inquire about this? So I think if you put them in elementary schools, yes, they're a line of defense. And I would suggest that if Newtown had a school resource officer and the vehicle was parked out front, the cruiser, and there was some sort of resistance, I think things may have been different. There is a deterrent factor. That's not the primary role of a school resource officer, but there is a deterrent factor, and there is a person with a weapon in the building.
And what have your conversations been with colleagues around this?
Most of my colleagues are very supportive. I mean, there are people who always ask questions about funding. There are people who are concerned about the militarization of schools. There are people who are concerned about the SRO model. My experience in 29 years in a public school classroom is that the SRO model works. In fact, I wish we had another one at East Providence High School. I wish we had more in East Providence. I think they just enhance the school community. Look, there's challenges surrounding this bill that we're going to have to sift through and figure out, you know, where the financing will come from. How do we train this number of people, and what kind of capacity we have?
Okay, so that's one piece of the legislation. There's a whole other separate piece of legislation addressing how to provide reimbursements to schools who are looking to address just safety measures. locked doors, bulletproof materials. I mean, what types of things do you envision that schools will look at if this type of money is available to them?
Right, and so just some background. We have a proposal from the governor, $250 million in bond money that would go towards school construction and refurbishment. So if a school district wanted to enhance their security in any way, some of the things you mentioned, maybe some door alarms, perhaps bulletproof glass, as you mentioned, then we could do that and get reimbursement from the state based on the same formulas that are embedded into the governor's proposal and that exist already with the RIDE housing. There's so much technology out there to enhance school security. There's an entire industry, crime prevention through engineering, that we can listen. We secure nuclear facilities, we secure government buildings, we secure banks, we secure the State House, but we haven't had that kind of intensity around schools.
And what do you hear from, especially teachers and educators? You know, I'm sure you hear from students who have are fearful of the worst case scenario, but what do you hear teachers say, I wish we had this?
Yeah, most of the teachers that I work with and that I talk to think this is a pretty good idea. It gives them peace of mind. They have great relationships with the school resource officers, and they think it's proactive. A lot of times we are reactive, and this is a reactive. It's not a new idea, but it's a reactive idea for us. But school resource officers are really proactive within the community, so they can kind of cut something off before it happens. So teachers know that. I think the general public hears armed guards in schools and gets a little queasy, and I do too. No one can have a worse rating from the NRA than I do. I mean, my name's been on every gun control proposal in the General Assembly. I was one of the key sponsors of the domestic violence proposal last year. But this is something different. This is a practical application of security principles that can protect our children.
And in addition to the SROs, you know, what do educators really want within the schools? Locked doors. I mean, what are those? I'm going to move you a little closer here.
Sure.
Locked doors, the bulletproof glass. I mean, and the thing is too, I mean, you talk about schools having that reimbursement capacity. You know, are we going to see some schools, quote unquote, better prepared than others? Is it just the reality of the world in which we live?
I mean, it's been the reality in Rhode Island school construction forever, right? The zip code, unfortunately, has determined the quality of the building. I think the citizens of a municipality, of a town, should be demanding this. And if you're going to refit your building, then you should be looking into the best ways to secure that building. And listen, we have a lot of school buildings that are already doing that. But if we're going to reimburse for STEM education or STEAM education, if we're going to reimburse for career and tech, if we're going to reimburse for green building, then we should reimburse for school safety as well.
Well, I appreciate your coming in to talk about this again, the school vacation week, not so much of a vacation heading back, but you're heading back up to the assembly next week. I'll be up there on Thursday doing live from the State House each and every week. What else is on your plate that you'd like folks to know about that's on your agenda for 18 while you're here in the studio?
My biggest agenda item is connected to this. It's the school construction policy. We're hoping to build a new school in East Providence, and I've toured so many schools in Rhode Island that are in shambles. And we have waited too long with the moratorium and then the lack of funding. That's my number one priority, is to get this thing moving, get this money into circulation, and have these districts enhance their schools. Massachusetts is a decade ahead of us, and learning and the environment are connected. And so we have to do this.
One of the things that we're not hearing too much about right now is after it passed out of the Senate, kind of in a holding pattern in the House, the PAWSOX. Did you think you were going to come in and not get asked?
No, you know, I'm a proponent of the new proposal. Now my district borders on Pawtucket. I have many people in my district that go to those games. I think they're a part of the fabric of Rhode Island society. I don't see how this can be a financial loser. The Pawtucket Red Sox are not going anywhere. The Boston Red Sox, their parent club, need them close to them. This looks like it's revenue neutral at worst and could possibly be better than that. I think the proposal the Senate has put forward is a good one. I'm in favor of it. I may not be a majority in my chamber, but I am in favor of it.
So what do we expect to happen? Do you think that there'll be movement on this in the coming weeks?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know the speaker, and I agree with the speaker. I think he's looking for some more commitment from the team to back up some of this money, to take a little more of the risk on. I don't disagree with that. And I think if that happens, if we see movement toward those type of proposals, I think it may have a chance to move.
Would they have to go through the process again? You know, we had so many hearings in the fall about this. If there's a separate legislative proposal, are we going to have to go through again that public hearing?
I don't think you'll have to go through the public hearing, other than the public hearing that exists within the hearing committees at the State House, because I think most of this has been flushed out. There's not very much new information. We know what Speaker Mattiello would like to see. We know what many of my colleagues would like to see. I think the public is pretty much decided on this.
Do you think the public's decided? We've been in the polls, and there's
Well,
been some high disapproval
I
numbers.
think the public's decided on the Paw Sox, wanting the Paw Sox to stay. I don't know if they know what the details are. I mean, if you just throw a question out there that says, do you want them to pay, do you want taxpayer dollars to go toward this? I think the knee-jerk reaction is no. We have to look at stadium projects individually, not holistically. I mean, this is not a major league stadium project. We can't expect the Crafts to come in and purchase the entire thing. That's not the model. It doesn't exist. What does exist...
The Crafts look to do a soccer stadium up in Boston with all their funding.
Yeah, they can do that. I mean, they're a major league situation. You know, they're going to get that funding back. And MLS is different than minor league baseball.
And final question while I have you in here, again, not your chamber, but we're seeing today that the Senate put forth a proposal to expel Senator Nick Kettle for what the charges that we found out this week were. I mean, this is unprecedented to expel a member of a legislative body. What has your discussions been with colleagues surrounding this? Again, I know not your jurisdiction.
Yeah, I really haven't had discussions with colleagues regarding this. You know, I spent a long time teaching government and politics, and so I'm a due process guy. I also understand that the Senate has rules. Now, my personal opinion is that when you become a distraction to the body, and when you can't really represent your constituency, it's probably best to step aside. You know, I'm a due process guy, so I don't like to see when we don't have due process in place, but I certainly understand the Senate has rules and they have to function.
It was interesting, we had House Minority Leader Patricia Morgan in yesterday, and we had mentioned that the ACLU had come out with their concerns about that. I think her joke was maybe one of the first times that she'd agreed with Rhode Island ACLU on an issue about the due process side of things, but that hearing is on Tuesday. You can read about that on GoLocal right now. So I appreciate your taking the time to come in. When do we expect the actual introduction of these bills to happen?
Both bills will be introduced on Thursday, and then they'll be scheduled for hearing, and we'll be able to hash this out some more.
Okay, very good. Representative Maury, I appreciate your taking the time to come
Thank you,
all the way into Providence.
Appreciate it.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I'll let you around the corner. Representative Greg Maury just announced that he's got 2 pieces of legislation to address school safety measures, including more school resource officers, including elementary schools, acknowledges the budgetary issues surrounding this, and then also about the reimbursement for school safety measures included in the school rehabilitation money that the governor has proposed. We'll be right back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Don't go anywhere.
Oh, is this live?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. I want to thank Representative Greg Amori coming in from East Providence to talk about school safety measures. We're going to tack a little more north now. We're going to go up to Boston, where I have Dr. Jeffrey Spiegel, renowned plastic surgeon, here with me in studio. Dr. Spiegel, thank you for joining us today.
Great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's especially newsworthy that we have you on because we just heard up in Massachusetts, Swampscott's principal, one of the educators there, has announced that they are transitioning. And you are very much at the forefront of this transitioning process in plastic surgery for the face, facial feminization surgery. And you're one of the world-renowned experts. How did you get into this?
Question. I'm a facial plastic surgeon in the Boston area in Newton, like you said, and I'm also a professor at Boston University in the School of Medicine. So many years ago, when I was just starting my career, a transgender woman came to see me and said, "Can you help me look more like I'm supposed to? Because people are using the wrong genders, using the wrong pronouns, and this is frustrating." So I said, "Well, sure, I can do surgery, but what am I supposed to do? Like, what do you need to do?" I looked at the literature on it, and there was very little written. Now, it turns out, after doing a lot of the research myself, that knowing how to make a face look feminine is fundamental to knowing how to make a face look attractive and beautiful.
And so what are some of those things that you look at? If someone approaches you and says, "I know you're at the forefront of this," and you look at a male who's transitioning to a female's face, I mean, what are the characteristics that you look at and say, this is how we're going to approach this?
Great question. Well, you've probably heard the old saying, beauty is skin deep. Well, it turns out that beauty is deeper than skin deep. Beauty is bone deep. A lot of what we use to determine if a person is a male or a female, if a person is young or old, if a person is attractive or unattractive, has to do with the shape of their skull. So I'll do things like set back the skull here. I'll make the eye sockets larger. We'll make the cheeks larger. We'll make the jawbone narrower. We'll get rid of any Adam's apple. We'll change the shape of the hairline, change the shape of the eyebrows. There's just an enormous number of minor things that we pay attention to that make the difference.
And how much of that is the symmetry? You see it in the press all the time of the conventionally attractive people. You see the lines drawn, it's the chin, it's the ratio to the eyes. Does that play a role?
I don't think it's a huge part. Symmetry is important to an extent. No one's completely symmetric. Symmetry is helpful, though. If you're very asymmetric, it might be a sign of disease, right? Or some sort of developmental abnormality, which is why we would find symmetry attractive. But all these mathematical ratios that people have tried to calculate and determine over the years, they don't really hold up to careful scrutiny. And it makes sense. There are attractive faces that are Caucasian and African and Asian and you name it, every ethnicity in the world, there are beautiful faces, and the ratios and the numbers are different. So it's something else. It has to do much more with the play of light. We really look for bright eyes, a bright mouth. We want to see a lot of light reflected from these areas.
And so when you have someone who comes in and says, "I'm transitioning," they have other things that they're looking at as well, other medical bills as well. Do you give them suggestions and say, "This is what I recommend"? Is it a la carte? Is it nose, cheeks, ears? Or do you really have to sort of do the whole kit and caboodle?
A la carte is a funny way to put it, but it's not inaccurate. What I like to do is I'll look at a person's face and I'll say, okay, in the following order, here's where you're going to get the biggest impact.
Aha.
And I'll say, okay, if you want to be seen as very feminine, procedure 1. If you want to be seen as feminine and young, procedure 1 and 2. Feminine, young, and beautiful, 1, 2, and 3. And eventually, I get to the point where I say, this next one, this might be like massaging seats in your car. A fun thing to have, but you don't need it, right? Like you might want it, but you don't need it. And you can decide if you want to get it or not. That's where we get into things like, fuller lips versus less full lips, things like that.
And so when you talk about, to the average layperson, plastic surgery is plastic surgery, but you talk about addressing bone structure, but then you talk about fillers and lips. I mean, how much of it is de facto changing the structure of a face, and how much of it is augmenting through fillers and things of that nature?
Well, it's both. I need to control the play of light. So, for example, if I see someone and I want to make sure that they look young and attractive and beautiful, I'm going to look at how much light is bouncing off their eyes. If they have a heavy forehead with low eyebrows, this is like a visor. It's blocking the light. So I need to address that. If they have flattened cheeks, either because of testosterone exposure or because they're getting older or it just runs in the family, I might say, you know what, we should fill in this area. Now, many women, as they get into their 30s, 40s, and beyond, come into our office to get fillers in the cheeks. And that's because once you've rounded this out and gotten rid of the volume loss, your eyes get brighter, the eyelids get shorter, and the whole picture is feminine, youthful, and beautiful.
So how much of your business, doctor, are people who are transitioning, and are you seeing more and more of it?
Well, I've been probably the busiest surgeon at this in the world for many years. So we see people from, you name it, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, California, everywhere, every day who come in. But we also see an equal number of women who are not transgender who come from these same places with the thought of, my gosh, if you can take someone who looks like a man and make them look like a beautiful woman or a supermodel, imagine what you can do for me. I'm not starting off with that much of a handicap. And we see that all the time. So, we're super busy. That's the biggest problem I have, is that it's pretty hard to get in to see us. But we're working on trying to increase the capacity.
A couple more questions while I have you, doctor, because this is fascinating and you're an expert in the field. How much does estrogen and testosterone play in the transitioning process and actually sort of helping change features and the makeup of a person?
Well, it depends on what stage in your life. If you're going through puberty, the influx of hormones can have a major effect on how your body looks. And then once you've matured, I think it depends on where you're going. If you are a woman who is transitioning to a man and you take testosterone, you will look like a man very quickly.
Okay.
If you are a transgender woman transitioning to look more female, the estrogen I don't think helps a ton. It can improve your skin quality. It can improve some of the fat distribution. Very importantly for the work that I do, it helps to prevent hair loss because we do hair grafts and things for men who have lost their hair and for transgender women who've had testosterone exposure and had hairline recession.
So question for you, doctor, you talk about facial feminization surgery. Do you do it the other way? Is there any way for, you talk about men taking testosterone, women transitioning to men taking testosterone and that helping, but do you ever see someone come in that says, help me look more like a man?
Sure, we see that for transgender men and for men who just want to have a stronger or more angular look. So we can do jaw implants, chin implants. We can add to the Adam's apple. We can make the cheeks larger or smaller. Just about any body part you can think of, we can move around.
Final question, doctor. Caitlyn Jenner is a very well-known figure for a transgender surgery that has been out there. What would you have done differently with Caitlyn Jenner?
Well, that's an awkward question for me, but I'll tell you, most of the famous transgender models and actresses and celebrities who you look at and you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that she's transgender. They all came through our office. For Caitlyn Jenner, I would have had a different approach. So I'll just leave it at that.
Does it really come down to the individual? You talk about that. You see pictures of Caitlyn, other transgender individuals, but is it really on the individual basis?
Are you talking about how good you can look?
Yes, how good you can look or what you decide to do.
Well, there's a number of things. So, for example, certainly someone who is better looking to start with will end up better looking when they're done, right? So if you give me Arnold Schwarzenegger, I can't give you Tinkerbell, right? That's not going to work.
No.
But we can do a really good job. And then after that, with all modesty, there's a certain amount of artism and skill that's associated. So I sometimes use the analogy of paint. You can give paint to two people. One person will make you a masterpiece, and the other one's going to make a mess, and you have to get a new carpet.
Well, you're a foremost expert in the field, and again, based off of what we saw, with the Swampscott principal saying that they're transitioning and plenty of individuals are around the country and you're at the forefront of the field. Wanted to talk with you a little bit about that expertise in the facial feminization surgery. So doctor, I appreciate your taking the time to Skype in with us here at GoLocal. Hopefully we'll have the chance to talk with you soon.
It's my pleasure. And if you ever want to come visit us at the Spiegel Center, you're welcome.
Fantastic, doctor. Well, we appreciate it. We wish you a good evening and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks. Dr. Jeffrey Spiegel, appreciate us taking the time to Skype in. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to thank my guests so far, Greg Amori and Dr. Jeffrey Spiegel, and I'd now like to welcome my next guest in, the Reverend Dr. Don Anderson with the Rhode Island State Council of Churches.
Good to be with you.
I appreciate your coming in today because we had a fascinating conversation this morning as it
Right.
pertained to the
Yep.
passing of Billy Graham at age 99. You're one of the foremost experts in religion in the state. I picked up the phone and said I wanted to call you up and just ask about his evangelical legacy, but clearly it had a huge impact on all religions.
Well, there's no question that we have to understand each person in their context and time. And so if you look at the time when Billy Graham was really big in the 60s and 70s and moving into the 80s, he actually was an inclusive person, especially for someone coming from the evangelical camp. In fact, I grew up in a very conservative background, and we considered Billy Graham a liberal. So, you can get where I came from, right?
This is in the time context, absolutely.
And so because he would invite Catholic bishops and Episcopal bishops, who at that time, was just miles apart, and invite them to offer prayers on the platform and be part of the program. And so that was really pretty enlightening and very much ahead of its time.
So people, again, it's all the headlines today about his passing. So many folks have seen him on TV.
Right.
And there's a lot of remembering his impact right now. But what do you think his legacy will be? Is it being at that forefront of that TV evangelical movement, or is it more than that?
So I think that when we really dig deep, there is more than that. Graham did and really pioneered in this modern way of doing these mass rallies all around the United States, starting with the rally in Los Angeles right after World War II. But the real impact, I think, of Billy Graham is on, number one, helping evangelicals to open their eyes to work with other people and be with other people. And also, one of the things that was happening during this era that a lot of people have forgotten about is there are a lot of what I would call fly-by-night evangelists who are just getting on TV or doing some of these things and raking in the dough and stuffing their own pockets with that money and not being careful with it. And so Graham was one of the leading founders of putting together an organization that still exists today that's called the Evangelical Council for Financial Responsibility. And they set up standards by which organizations should use for accounting, really demanded integrity. And so Graham led in that way. Up until his leadership, it really was a no man's land, and kind of everybody did was right in their own eyes, to quote the book of Judges. So it wasn't the greatest thing. So he did that. He wasn't perfect. I know there have been some stories today about his comments to Richard Nixon that were taped and verified when the tapes came out in 2002. I grieve at that and I cringe at that because so much of the work we do is with the Jewish community, and we love working with the Jewish community, and that is a big part of what we do here in Rhode Island. So he's not a perfect man, and I think that he did apologize for that, and I accept that he was sincere, but it still was wrong. It was very wrong, and but you know, he's human. One of my big grievings is that the direction of the organization since he stepped aside has been exactly the opposite. Where Graham was trying to always push the envelope to expand and be inclusive, the organization now led by his son Franklin is doing just the opposite. It's bringing things back narrow, and some very hateful things. What Franklin Graham has said, for example, about the Muslim community is absolutely outrageous and absolutely deplorable. And I have to believe that if Billy were alive and able to be active and engaged, that's exactly not the stance he would have taken.
So I do want to speak to that once we speak a little bit further about Billy's legacy. Why was he so popular?
Well, I think, you know, he came about at a time when the country was just finishing World War II. He was the same age as many of these young men coming back. He was a combination of this kind of shy, southern, soft-spoken person, but who could really put a message together and talk to the common person. He didn't use a lot of highfalutin theological terminology. You know, he talked about real things from people's lives. And he was sincere. I mean, he believed what he was talking about, and he connected with people. He was a real person who connected with people. But he was the right person for the right time. And, you know, TV was just starting to emerge in those days. You know, again, we think about all these channels we watch and everything. I mean, I remember as a kid here in Rhode Island where there were 2 stations. And it was all black and white. In fact, our first TV was round. But I know, I'm really dating myself. Okay, so, you know, so we have to place him in that time frame.
Yes.
And for me, his leading in the financial responsibility and his leadership in terms of pushing the envelope to make the church more inclusive and people talking with one another. Those are the things I'll take away. You know, disappointed in some other stuff, but you know what? I'm going to leave people a lot of disappointed in some of the things I did in my life too. I mean, it's just the way it is. We're all human.
So you know, you talk about his role really in that evangelical movement coming out after World War II. When did we really see, because when we talk about the evangelicals, we often talk hand in hand with politics. When did evangelical, religion become synonymous with political activism as well?
So when I was growing up as a child, you didn't talk about politics. You know, church people and politics were totally separate. The two didn't meet, especially in the conservative community. In the more progressive communities where there was a fight for social justice, you had political engagement, but not on the conservative side. Along came the moral majority and Jerry Falwell.
Okay.
And when they started bringing that together, and then people like Pat Robertson came along and joined in. And so it was that moral majority movement that really started to bring the evangelical group together. The evangelical church, I believe, is making the same mistake that the more progressive mainline church made. The mistake that the progressive, more mainline church made was they got too cozy with the Democratic Party and sometimes defended Democrats when they shouldn't have been defended. What's happening today, in my view, is that the evangelical community has become too closely aligned with the Republican Party, and goodness sake, they are defending Donald Trump. I mean, how in the world is that happening, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Hopefully they'll learn that lesson. As people of faith, we need to speak to issues and to policies and not get too cozy and too embedded with any one political party, or else we lose our credibility and we lose our integrity.
And let's talk a little bit about the money factor. Money has always been around with religion, back from the days of giving so much of your income to the Catholic Church, but how did the evangelicals get so much money?
So a big part of the evangelical movement has been tithing. And so many of the people are very faithful, and they give 10% of their income to their local church and then share it with other groups. there have been many, and Graham, for example, was one of the first to pioneer this. But there was a thing that originally came up called Living Letters by a fellow by the name of Taylor. And what it basically was a paraphrase, a contemporizing of the New Testament epistles. And he offered that as a premium if people sent in a certain amount of money. And people loved that. They loved that Living Letters because, up until that time, everybody was reading the King James Bible. So you'd read these words like fornication and other stuff. You go, what is that, right? Well, when you read Living Letters, it said sex. And you go, and I remember as a 14-year-old going, oh, okay, I get that. It's talking about something that's in my life, right?
So it resonated.
Yeah, exactly. And so it resonated with a lot of people. And so, they became very sophisticated in terms of raising money. And I think a lot of people believed in Graham. Someone told me years ago, nobody ever gives money to an organization, they give to a person. And I think in the religious community that is particularly true, that there is someone who captures the imagination and trust of other people, and then they give to that person. And for the most part, I think Billy Graham deserved that trust that people gave him.
So are you surprised, not surprised, at the sort of media reaction today? He was a larger-than-life figure. I mean, is this a moment in American history?
Well, I think it is, and it's really, we're really passing from an era of what I would call almost religious innocence in a certain sense. I mean, Graham related to both Republican and Democratic presidents. He didn't go there with a political agenda per se. He was there really on a personal piety mission. I respect that. That was maybe appropriate for the time. However, I would say, but you know what? God has called us to stand for certain values related to justice. And so maybe he said some things to people in private. We don't know. I mean, that was also the days of things kept in private. I mean, we didn't know until years later about the secret things that happened during the Kennedy administration in terms of his personal life. Because in those days, those things didn't get reported on. So it was a very different day. And there's a lot that we don't know. And I hope that along at some point, somebody can look back and really dig in and find out what happened, both the good, the bad, and the in-between. But on balance, I think he was a great American. I think he was a great faith leader, and he's somebody who I hold in high esteem.
And so just want to finish up with you here. You talk about his legacy, you talk about his son, and you talk about where he's going with his religious direction. Do you have concerns about certain facets of the evangelical community being so exclusionary of other religions? And where do things stand in that regard?
So this is an issue that has been part of the Christian church from its inception, how we relate to other religious traditions for a number of years, because Christianity was so dominant in the United States, so overwhelmingly dominant, that we didn't think much about interreligious activity. In fact, when Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, he talked about Christian children and Jewish children being together. In those days, that was interreligious, right? That was it. Today we have a plurality of religious expressions. Christians are no longer they're still dominant, but not the way they were before. And we need to be thinking about how we relate to other traditions. And I think one of the things it takes to do that is theological humility. I think we have to think to ourselves and say, maybe I don't know everything, and maybe I have to open myself up to learn from someone else and appreciate from their tradition, and that I don't have all of the answers. But for some of us in the Christian sandbox, that's a real problem.
And so finally, while I have you in here, an issue that has been persisting now in this country, unfortunately, is the issue of gun violence. And
Yes.
we see it at churches, we see it at schools, we see it in public places. Just had Representative Greg Morey from East Providence talking about making schools safer. I know we've talked about this issue in the past
Right.
as well. It happens every time there is a mass shooting. And I know you've had some things that you want to say about it.
Yeah, so I think it's very important that congregations and ushers and people who work in congregations be aware of things like situational awareness and some other strategies to help keep things calm. However, as a council of churches and personally, we do not endorse bringing concealed weapons into a space of worship. Worship space should be safe space. That means it's theologically and emotionally safe. The presence of guns, I think, has no place at all in a house of worship, and they just need to be out of there. Should someone come in, and fortunately, the number of shootings we've had within congregations and house of worship has been somewhat minimal, and I hope it stays that way. But if we start bringing in guns, we start frisking people or going through metal detectors, what the message we're going to send is that you're really not welcome here. If you're a distressed person, look, a lot of our ministry is with people who are depressed, who are going through difficult times in their lives. We don't want to put up any walls to say, we don't want to talk with you. That's antithetical to our whole mission. And so we have to be a little courageous ourselves and be willing to say, we'll take reasonable risk. We're not going to try and make ourselves totally safe, because that becomes counter then to our whole purpose for being.
And so you talk about addressing the downtrodden, the folks who have mental issues, and we've seen so much of the argument and the debate. Is there more mental illness today than there has been in the past? Is that the case? I mean, from people that you see at the religious perspective, people who come to churches looking for help, looking for faith, is 2018 different than 1980, different than 1950?
So, I was around in the 50s, but I wasn't ministering then, so I can't talk about it. So the few times I get to say I wasn't doing that. But anyway, I think the point is this. I don't know that there's more or less. My guess is there probably isn't any more. However, we have developed the ability for people who feel the need to seek help to go get that help. And so people who before may have kind of stayed behind the scenes are not coming out to get that help. My concern is that as we talk about mental health issues, that we be very thoughtful about how we talk about it, so that we don't drive people back, behind the wall, so they're not getting the help we need. That'll be totally counterproductive, because there's a lot of people who need the help, get the help, and then they don't do anything that's irrational or harmful. But if we don't encourage them to get that help, then we've got a problem. And I have a real problem with a president who says, we're going to talk about mental health, but who's trying to destroy the Affordable Care Act, who is cutting back on Medicaid and Medicare, and cutting back on resources for people to get more mental health. That's totally bonkers.
And speaking of addressing mental health issues, again, as the head of the State Council of Churches with a myriad of religions here in the state, we've seen numbers that say more agnostic people in the country than ever before. Is there a call amongst churches to try to get people to come believe in a higher power and a faith when they're going through difficult times?
I think that the answer to that is yes, but, okay? A lot of our congregations have models of how they organize and worship that worked well in the middle of the 20th century. And even though the faith is the same, they haven't made the move in terms of how they worship and how they work and how inclusive they're going to be. So many congregations have become older. They've become more concerned about survival than they have about mission. And so we've got a lot of soul searching to do ourselves. However, I was in a class at CCRI just last week with 25 millennials, and all but 2 of them no longer went to any sort of worship service, even though they'd been raised in it. However, when we started talking about some things in a way that was different than they necessarily talked about it, all of a sudden there was engagement, there was conversation. I actually got a couple of really nice emails from many people saying, maybe I need to go back and rethink this. So that's our hope.
The emergence here into the new era. Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come in today. Again, the passing of Billy Graham, so many myriad of issues just going on at the national level as well. We always appreciate having your perspective here, Don. So
Thanks,
thank
Kate.
you for coming
Always
in.
welcome.
Okay, we'll let you go. I know you're a busy guy.
Thank you. So long. Bye now.
Reverend Dr. Don Anderson wanted to bring him in, chatted with him this morning about Billy Graham, but talking about his legacy. Again, passing today at 99, so appreciate Don taking the time to come into the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We appreciate your tuning in and watching this News and Politics Hour. Molly O'Brien was filling in for Rick Simone at the 3 o'clock hour. She'll be back tomorrow at 3. I'll be back at 4, but be sure to tune in to Go Local Prov. A lot of news today. The Senate introduced a resolution to look to expel Senator Nick Kettle this next Tuesday. is scheduled for a hearing in the Senate Judiciary. And then if you missed it, GoLocal did break the news that Central Falls Mayor James Diosa gave a no-bid contract to former police chief here in Providence, Dean Esterman, for services in Central Falls. You can read all about that on GoLocal Prov. So thank you for watching. We look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow. Be sure to catch us on Facebook, online, and then back in studio. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.